All right, so we have some interesting topics that have emerged here. I always like to do this. It gives us a good visual, I think, of kind of how we're thinking in the room and if we tend to think about the same things. One of the things I thought was good was when I handed out the Post-it notes and I said to write up a couple of them. I didn't see anybody just sit with a pen on the paper just having no idea what to write. Right? I mean, you had ideas. Yeah, maybe had to think a little bit to come up with a couple of them that you wanted to actually write down. But the fact is, as educators, we should always have all kinds of questions in our heads, right? Because there are no answers to a lot of these things. There are things that we can collect data on. We're always trying to answer. It's kind of like, you know, if you really put your back to the wall and you say, has there been a definitive study that's been done that shows that cooperative learning is absolutely essential to learning math? No, it's never been done. There are studies that suggest that using cooperative learning strategies in math and science both promote a number of different things and tend to be helpful in teaching, but we don't have the definitive study that says every teacher should be doing this, right? Just like the use of technology. Do we have a study that says unless a science teacher is using significant technology in his or her teaching, students aren't going to learn anything? No, it's never been proven. But on the other hand, some benefits of using technology have been shown, and so we should always as teachers be in the mode of thinking of research. How can I make what I'm doing better? What do we already know about use of technology? What about if you use it? What if you don't use it? So the questions you came up with, this area over here is the biggest cluster we have. We've got using cross-curricular ideas and examples, cross-curriculum, making math class cross-curricular, etc. Exploring math and science through literature, incorporating language arts into the math and science classroom, using reader's theater to help students learn math topics, and textbook, the use of textbooks and literacy. So something about literacy and cross-curricular is big right here. Closely connected to that over here are use of journals in a math class and self-reflection, journal writing, writing across the curriculum, some type of journal writing and self-reflection. So that's connected to it, but not exactly the same thing. Another cluster we have over here has all to do with motivation. We've got motivation in math or science classroom, self-efficacy, motivation, lack of motivation in math class, and how to get students motivated, and how do we teach students to persevere through math challenges them. The whole idea of cognitive and motivation. A cluster down here of what can I do to make my students enjoy math? How can we help students who struggle with negative numbers? What about alternatives to tests that show understanding differently in math class, using textbooks as a resource to aid in math understanding? So kind of this whole idea of helping students that struggle and shooting for deeper understanding. We have in this area group work. So we've got meaningful group work versus individual learning, and how to use group or cooperative learning to increase comprehension. These over here are all about classroom management strategies, classical conditioning, using reward systems in the classroom. How special students' interest in sports affect grades and involvement in the classroom. If you teach a lesson around basketball, math, basketball players will do better. But what about any kind of connection with extracurriculars, the effect on middle school students? Problem solving, strategies to provide students confidence in math and being able to use those type of strategies. These three over here are all about kind of the use of inquiry, active or engaged learning, inquiry learning in a science classroom, and how does having classroom pets aid in the teaching process of science. So again, that whole idea of how do we use inquiry in our classroom. We got people interested in differentiated instruction. What does that mean? How do you use it in the classroom, practically speaking? And then we've got a bunch of individual ones that don't seem to connect to the others, but maybe they do. Use of feedback to our students. What is a typical straight-A student's lifestyle like? Interesting question. Using technology to develop graphical understanding. Note-taking techniques. Parent involvement, its effect. What about a field trip? What makes for an effective field trip? Can't read it from here. Mints? Is that mints?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. Do mints actually help when taking a test? I've heard of that. It stimulates the brain. It's an interesting question. Educational philosophy of students versus teachers. What is the philosophy that a student has about what classroom is supposed to look like, and how does that compare with the teacher's philosophy? And I think that's it. So you've got a good, diverse group of things here. I'm curious, just kind of having read through those and seeing what the topics are. Any immediate reactions to either any of the categories or something that what we just went through right here makes you think about or wonder about? Alicia?
Well, I wrote the one about extracurriculars, the one on the left that's just about how extracurriculars affect the students. But the other one you read makes me think about, like, if these students are in extracurriculars, does it affect them? If they aren't, does it affect them? Like a lesson on using basketball or something.
Mm-hmm.
So incorporating that differently than I was thinking.
Interesting, yeah, because there's a couple different ways of looking at what the effects of extracurriculars might be. Right? Do you bring it into your classes? So one way, yeah, right. So one way to look at that is to say, I mean, here's a hypothesis. You might say, or maybe it's not a hypothesis, it's a question. You might say, are the students in my classes who are most engaged in extracurricular activities outside of class, do they tend to do better in my class? And if so, kind of what's the relationship? And if not, why not? You know, I mean, one argument is that they're really involved in extracurriculars that might be getting in the way, and they're not doing as well. And the other side of it is if they're involved in extracurriculars, it could be because they're really goal-oriented people, and they might be just as goal-oriented in my class, too. I mean, I know from my experience, my football players in my classes over the years have done a heck of a lot better during football season than out of season. Why do they do that? Because they're so disciplined during football season. They know they got practice at this time. You guys who play sports, you know that when you're in a sport, that really disciplines you. You've got to get your studying done at this time, etc. And you tend to do better. At least my students have historically done better during season than out of season. My son is a good example of that. He does better during baseball season than he does out of baseball season because he's a lot more regimented time, that you're in. So there's a question. There's a research question. Is that true for my students? Are the extracurriculars helping, or are they getting in the way? And then the other side of it, as Felicia pointed out, could be just to say, if I've got a lot of students in my class that are playing football, maybe I need to focus a lesson or a series of lessons around football. Maybe that will draw those students in. To what degree will their interest in extracurriculars allow me to be able to bring students into some, whether it be problem solving or lab activity or whatever it is. Great. What else? What else? Sarah?
I just thought it was interesting, like the vast majority of like subjects or topics that we have up there. Because I mean, you have like your normal ones like differentiated instruction, motivation, like assessments. Like we talk about those in a lot of our classes. But then like some of like these other ones, it's just like really cool to think that people are thinking about these because they're not necessarily topics that come up in a lot of our classes. So I just thought it was neat to see like the array of topics like this.
Yeah, that's a good point, because some of these are definitely things that we tend to talk about in education classes. And some of these are just interesting areas of interest that you have that you've probably never even necessarily encountered in an education class, which is something you're curious about.
I like the variation between the specific topics. Like you said, like, it's not just like classroom management, but then it's like how can we classroom train students to make our classroom management better. So I think it was cool to see like what specific parts of bigger topics people are more interested in.
Yeah, good point. And what you're going to find is as you work with your advisors on topics for your study, you're probably going to hear your advisor at one time or another pushing you to narrow the topic rather than to broaden it. Most people walk into an action research project with way too broad of a question. And if the question's really broad, you can collect any kind of data. So if I were to say something like, my research question is, what kind of classroom management strategies work best? Good luck. How about, will this particular management strategy produce this kind of a result? Let's focus on one thing. People sometimes go into doing a study way too broadly with too big of a question, and we have to sort of narrow that. An action research project is usually pretty narrow. It's one thing that you really want to look at. You study hard and you try to come up with an answer for it. You're not going to solve all the world's problems with one study. What else? Megan?
I was just interested in the math journals that like both people were with because I never really thought about using journals like weekly in a math classroom, and like I guess I would wonder how do you assess that and just what does that look like?
Yeah, and Betsy, you went to a session at OCTM on using math journals, right?
Yeah.
So the use of journals in a math class or a science class have become much more popular over the last 6, 8, 10 years. So what are examples of a couple things that you learned?
With the main thing that she talked about in her session was having notebooks divided into two sides, the left and the right. Like on the left-hand side, you do all your calculations, but on the right-hand side, you talk about the overall concepts that you learned, or how different things link. She had students that had, there'd be a page towards the middle called the connections page, and she'd have a question like, what is a triangle? So then when you guys are talking about triangles, you link off with all these different ideas, and then they come together to like relate the entire unit. So to make those connections.
So let's play with that one for a minute. Let's suppose that you are interested in doing a study on journals in your class. And this is a good topic because it cuts across math and science. You can keep a math journal, you can write a science journal. Teacher gives prompts. It can be every day, it can be every other day, once a week, whatever students write in their journals. What is an example, what are a couple of examples of research questions that you might ask about journal use in a math or science classroom?
You could ask like, how are my students, how are they like, their thoughts developing as we like cover this content or go throughout like through the week or through the semester. In my freshman science class in high school, we had a kind of a journal, but it was just for our projects. And so, but we would like keep updating it, like it was our like rough drafts, and we would like keep updating it as we like learn more stuff. And so I feel like if you could critique them and like saw their progress, you would be able to kind of gather data off of that.
Okay. You want it. I was at the theory or the auction,
Yeah.
buy something you didn't mean to buy.
How do you use math journals as a form of assessment?
Good. That's a way to use math journals or science journals as a formative assessment. Okay.
How can you use math journals to promote problem solving?
Okay. Right. Can you promote problem solving with using journals?
I think I want to look at if your students write journals for a while to improve their ability to articulate what they're learning. I think a lot of times you can demonstrate it on the test, but to be able to explain to someone else what you just did is a lot more difficult.
Yeah, usually those prompts for a journal push a student to try to explain, put into words, explain, draw a picture of whatever, to express themselves. And our hope would be that over the course of using journals over some period of time, students become better at being able to do that. That's a way to enhance their communication skills. Right?
What is or is there a positive effect when using math journals on self-efficacy or learner autonomy?
Yeah, good. What are the effects on self-efficacy of a student when they're being asked to do this over time?
Can math journals be used to like promote math vocabulary use?
Math vocabulary use, right? So have you guys talked in your classes at all about academic language? Does that term come up? Raise your hand if the words academic language have come up in the class you've taken. Okay, so